I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone.
Hi,
welcome to Arcane Mark. Today, we're here to talk to you about teamwork. A secret cheat code that is not so secret. It's an open secret. Your GM and game designers do want you to know about this. And to get started, let's talk about why. Why do tabletop RPGs often build themselves such that if there is any challenge, and sometimes there isn't, and you can just win, but if there is, they often encourage using a teamwork-based strategy, such as by making team-based abilities or things that work together stronger in a certain way. So why is that? Well, the answer is because if you create an ability that sort of solipsistically makes one character into a god who can just win by themselves, then potentially, depending on the turn order, that person is just going to win. And they're going to be feeling very good, but maybe the rest of their team will not. If teamwork is encouraged in a tabletop RPG, which is why many tabletop RPG designers try to do that, that means whoever is working together is going to feel great about the success.
Yeah, so if you have to use tactics that rely on collaboration to defeat the enemies, then everyone's going to recognize that they had a part to play in the victory.
Exactly. And
or to overcome other challenges. Not always in combat, but that's another reason why a lot of other challenges, like victory point challenges or other things where you count up the numbers of successes, will have that in there. So it's not. It's then a challenge that's designed where there's not enough time or resources for one person to do it all by themselves, so that everyone needs to contribute in their own way.
Right. So this is true in really most tabletop RPGs that involve tactical play. Some don't and are more focused on the story, and so sometimes it's okay not to have teamwork, or teamwork isn't encouraged because the story might bring people into conflict with each other, and that's okay. That's fine for those games. Today we're going to be more talking about team-based tactical games. That includes Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Dungeons and Dragons, and just a whole host of other games that are in that niche. And when you get to those games, it just turns out, like, if you have a magic spell that just instantly takes all of the enemies who fail out of the fight, then that's maybe interesting for you, but it's not as interesting for other players. So sometimes these games have spells like that, or spells that do lots of damage, but they're not designed to make those like sort of the dominant strategy that it's just like, well, I could do any other spell than that, but my spell that instantly wins against large numbers of things is the strongest. So I feel bad if I don't do anything else, even though I know that means nobody else gets to play. In a lot of these games, they instead encourage by making them just, a little bit more reliable, or a little bit better if your group teams up with you, for people to cast spells that are like, okay, yeah, this one is a synesthesia spell that makes the enemy 3 easier to hit for my allies and will give them a big chance to crit them.
Yeah, so that's one of the main types of teamwork is things that have a direct numerical impact on your allies' chances of success. Increasing their accuracy, or possibly increasing their defenses numerically so that they're more likely to be protected.
Exactly. Just like if you looked at the thumb for this video, we showed a meme about flanking. Now, this episode isn't entirely about flanking. That is a very basic element of teamwork. Flanking is also a good litmus test about your group and what kind of a team you have. Because while teamwork and working together on strategy can be a cheat code to succeeding in tabletop RPGs, not every group is capable of teamwork. And it's possible. If you're the one watching this video, you learn all about teamwork, but everyone else at your table does not want to do any teamwork, if you're constantly pushing for teamwork, it can actually create like a table dynamic where people are feeling upset because they didn't want to do teamwork. So flanking is a good bellwether because a lot of the tables that just don't want to work together at all and kind of want to do the equivalent of an auto attack in a video game RPG will start by showing you that they are not flanking.
Yes.
So, to first justify flanking, in case you're just thinking, well, I'm not going to not flank, but I also don't see any reason to flank. I mean, it's just going to help accuracy a little bit. Flanking is very good in any game where it does anything. Now, in 5e D&D, if you don't use the rule that flanking gives you advantage and flanking just doesn't exist, then obviously you don't need to use flanking. But in Pathfinder 2, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, where flanking do something by default, or in 5e, if you use flanking as a rule, flanking is incredibly powerful. It makes a massive difference. So in Pathfinder 2, for example, and the same in Pathfinder 1, it's going to give you the equivalent of an extra 2 to your accuracy. In the case of Pathfinder 2, it does that by lowering the enemy's armor class by 2. With the off-guard condition, previously the flat-footed condition. But
I mean, other games, even that aren't D20 based, sometimes have mechanics where it's like, the result you need to roll on your D10 to hit is one lower if the enemy is in a position where you're attacking them from the back and they're distracted by someone or something like that.
And they might need to roll higher on their D10, or you get more dice in your dice pool, or there's all sorts of other ways that this functions. I'm going to use Pathfinder 2 as an example just because of the fact that we have a lot of PF2 fans in our audience, and also I have done the math on Pathfinder 2 pretty extensively.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying that there are other games that have similar mechanics that aren't built from the same D20 cloth, and it's the same goes true for them, how flanking is super worth.
Absolutely. I mean, it's possible to make a game where the mechanic for flanking isn't worth it if you were really trying.
I guess, But you can, you can definitely get a benefit out of that. And then it's worth considering, spending your resources in that in a way. So, for example, moving yourself, when you initially engage, do you move yourself in a way that makes it easier for other people to flank?
Yes. So let's take a look at flanking in Pathfinder 2. So if you're flanking and let's say you're fighting against a boss monster and you're a fighter, you built for massive accuracy, you wanted to do it all alone if you could. And so you did your best and you were somehow able to hit this opponent on a 10 on the D20. Maybe it wasn't like a severe boss creature. Maybe there were some other things going on. That's usually pretty good. You're probably not going to hit the boss more than that on a 10 if it's like a solo boss or something like that. So in that case, if you could get a flank or provide a flank for your allies, getting that flank is going to increase your expected damage by a third. That's huge, right? Because if you think about this, assuming that everybody in your party was increased by a third and you had 3 people, obviously it's hard to have 3 people all flanking, but just for the math's case, it would be like having a 4th additional character, like a phantom extra character that you added. And sure, maybe it's only 2 people up there flanking, so you didn't quite add an entire additional character's worth of damage from that. So this is a massive benefit, but there actually are a fair number of people who just won't do it or get kind of frustrated when you talk about, hey, wait, you had enough extra move. If you wanted to, you could have moved into the flank. And so if your group is not into that and doesn't want to use teamwork or tactics and is all about just everyone for themselves, one thing you can do is see if the GM is willing to make the fights easier, or if you're playing in a tabletop RPG that's super easy to win no matter what, maybe you just don't care or find another group. So if you're playing a game like Pathfinder 2 and the group is determined to just move in immediately right next to the enemy so they can get lots of attacks on you for free and then use all of your actions to strike, and that's all that they're going to do, it could be possible to get away with that if the GM made the encounters a little bit easier to make up for that.
But when I was talking about AOL making moving to get flanking feeling bad, one of the ways to help with that is also to consider, when you are getting yourself into the flanking position at first, if one person positions themselves so that the other person can get into a flanking position without a lot of trouble, like let's say that you have a monk who has faster movement speed than the fighter. Then it would make sense if you're the monk player for you to be the one who takes the farther spot on the enemy, so that then the fighter doesn't have to go as far and has an easier chance moving it.
Even if you are the fighter and your ally is the monk, sometimes if let's say you're playing some kind of Adventures League or Pathfinder Society game, and the GM, not only won't they make the fights easier, they can't, because they have a set difficulty. And you're definitely playing with this group who you hadn't met before and you didn't realize it, but they will not do tactics no matter what, not even flanking, right? And so you might be the one who has to take more effort to do it. But if you move into a position like you're playing a video game with like AI escort NPCs that will always go to the nearest spot or something like that, you might be able to get them to accidentally flank by moving into a space such that if they just charge right forward, they happen to have gotten into a flank. Yeah.
If you make the easier that you can make it for other players to do the teamwork thing, the more likely that, that more likely that they are to do it if they don't have to, like, do something complicated on their turn or sacrifice one of their attacks. Because, like, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, that, strike is usually not going to be your best bet. Using that third action for something else that's tactical or positional and can assist your teammates is usually going to be better.
Absolutely. And like Linda said, whether or not somebody is willing to use up one of their extra actions to get the flank is a different question than whether they're willing to get the flank if it doesn't use one of their extra actions. And the answer could be no in either of those cases. There are situations where you'll ask someone to be like, hey, could you move one spot over from there with your move? That way I could get into a flank with you. Or that would be a flank with me and you'll get benefits. And they might be like, oh yeah, thanks, that's awesome. Or they might be like, stop telling me how to play my character. No, I'm going to move where I said I was going to move. So you want to make sure that you understand how the other players are handling this if you haven't played with them before. And flanking is a good way to test that out because it's almost certain to come up, is at least assuming you're a melee character who can get involved with the flank, and it's easy to see how people react to talking about flanking. Now, obviously, it's one of the most basic ways to engage in teamwork. So other ways that are similar to flanking are anything that can provide a numerical advantage to your allies or a numerical disadvantage to your enemies.
Because there's a comment in chat that says, I'd rather find a different group than manipulate them into playing better. Not a bad suggestion generally, though. I feel like it's more that if you are in a situation where setting something up is going to require one of the players to spend additional character resources, that if you're the person who wants to do more teamwork, it's better for you to spend those resources on your character and actions rather than asking someone else to do it.
Yes, and furthermore, when I was talking about I guess you can move into the spot where they can't help but flank, that was specifically for you were playing a pickup game in some kind of organized play where it was you were only ever going to play with this group once. You couldn't find a different group, because I agree. It's much better to find a different group that is where you are in terms of tactics and teamwork, instead of just being the person who disagrees with all the rest of your group on teamwork. That's true as well if you're the one person who doesn't want to do teamwork in your group.
And you're like, however, I don't want to think about this, I just want to...
You're probably not watching this teamwork video if you're that person. So this is not made for them, but this is not made for you if that's who you are. But in that case, you also might want to find a different group.
Yeah. So I also, so you can move on with what you're saying. I just wanted to address that.
Well, I can't even remember what I was saying now that we went off into that side thing. I think it was something about other numerical forms of teamwork. Yes. So in general, in a tabletop RPG, doing something that will make the difficulty easier to handle or give a benefit to your allies, whether that's in a d20 where you give a bonus or let them roll multiple times and take the better result, or in a game system with a dice pool where you add more dice to their pool or lower the target number on the dice. The fact of the matter is that those kind of benefits are a force multiplier. And they are generally when I say a force multiplier, I do literally mean a multiplier and not just an additive benefit. If you add to damage, that is just an additive benefit. Now, it could be such a large additive benefit that it's better than a multiplier because you add tons of damage. But when you're increasing probabilities, that's multiplying the probabilities. And like in the example with flanking, where I pointed out it gives you like 4/3 of a person because you flanked, and therefore the 2 flanking people almost equate to 3 people. Similarly, anything like that, debuffing the enemy, stacking it all on, can achieve the similar results.
So when you're talking about stacking it all on, one other thing to consider when you're setting up a group for teamwork is how well your abilities work together or don't. So, for example, if you have a lot of people who have different ways to give a status bonus to attack rolls,
or a lot of people who all give advantage in 5e,
or a lot of people all give advantage, then that's not as useful because you're all targeting the same thing, and so you're gonna trip over each other. Whereas if someone has a way to decrease the enemy's armor class, and then another person has a way to increase the PC's accuracy, that's a lot more useful. So it's worth considering when you're building your teams, as well as deciding, for example, let's say that one person is a martial character that has a feat that lets them do something in a certain way, and then another character is a spellcaster, and the spellcaster can choose like, maybe I'm going to pick a different spell that doesn't overlap with this, or maybe the spellcaster's like, I really like this feat and already has that set up. Alright, the spellcaster already has the spell set up, and then the martial character's like, well, maybe I won't select this feat because this person already has that particular thing covered.
Exactly. So as Linda just pointed out, that's a little different than what we were talking about with turn-to-turn tactics. Teamwork can even come together into how you build your character. So, like in Linda's example, let's say you have something that either gives a certain type of bonus, like a status bonus in Pathfinder 2, or maybe it gives advantage in 5e, something that can't be used more than once. And let's say you had some character build that spent a lot of resources to just give your entire party advantage on attack rolls in 5e. It would be like getting status bonuses on all attack rolls in Pathfinder 2. Both of those are very strong. Honestly, that's kind of ridiculous in 5e. But if there was another player who was building a martial character who had a way to just give themselves a status bonus or advantage, that suddenly becomes way less useful. They should try to build into something else because they don't need it as much anymore now that you have somebody who can do that.
Yeah. And you might have situations where there are certain things that are useful to have multiple people being able to do. Like, for example, it's useful to have multiple characters in the party who can do in-combat healing, but you wouldn't want to have everyone having that be a major focus.
Right. When you're building for teamwork, having a variety of abilities is key. Yes, it is true that Healer Squad, where everybody has put much of their resources into healing, will take a long time to go down. But because of the fact that they put so many resources into healing that they don't have as much resources on offense, it means that they allow their enemies to do a wide variety of things and have a large number of turns, which can mean allowing enemies to pursue multi-turn combos or even just roll the dice enough times that something bad might happen.
Yeah.
And so, just like Linda said, part of teamwork is trying to bring in things that are different from your other players.
And sometimes that will pertain to things like, let's not both be trying to do the same thing at the same time when only one of us can actually apply the benefit. And it can also pertain to putting a lot of eggs in one basket. So, if you had a party where, everyone is built around dealing fire damage, or lots of people are relying on precision damage, and then your group runs into something that is immune to fire damage or immune to precision damage, then your group's going to really have trouble. So, and that's another thing to consider is if you have people who have some similar specializations, how can some of those characters branch out so that they're not all going to be stuck whenever like a particular circumstance happens?
What Linda is talking about there is sometimes called minimax when you're trying to create something like a chess AI. That is, you want to basically maximize your result in the worst case scenario because you're assuming that your opponent in the chess game is going to play well. And so when you're going to minimax, which is different than min-maxing, to be clear. When you're going to use minimax, you want to say, okay, so yeah, maybe this team that has all fire-based characters can put, and then they give the enemies fire weakness, and they do all these other things, and then it causes them to light on fire from this person every time they take fire damage, and this person gets to make a strike every time that someone takes persistent fire damage, which happened when they lit on fire, and you maybe have this combo that is obscene and can kill most things very easily, but then the minute the enemy is immune to fire, the entire clockwork parts of that teamwork falls apart. And so that's why, like Linda said, it's important when you're designing teamwork, not just to make something that works together well, because that example I made works together great, but something that is able to be diverse enough that it can work in a variety of situations.
So another aspect of teamwork, and one that I've seen folks talking about in chat as being particularly challenging, is positional. And so this has to do with several things. For example, the range at which an engagement begins. I think we've all had the Leroy Jenkins experience of a character with fast movement speed who charges in and attacks, and then other people are like, wait, what? But then I have to spend several rounds catching up while you were being wailed on by the enemies, or the whole thing where like the spellcaster wants to cast like an area or battlefield control spell, but the barbarian wants to the barbarian starts to rush it, wants to rush in, and then it's like, wait, no, but I can't do that without hitting you, some folks are like, well, yeah, this seems like a pretty dangerous situation. Maybe we should consider starting this as a ranged engagement and getting some pot shots in on them before we go to melee. And then the primarily melee character's like, no, I want to beat on them. And then the primarily melee character gets wrecked.
Yeah. And so Kojo in chat brings up a really good point. If you are playing a pickup game with a group and you have no idea what their characters are, especially something like Pathfinder Society or Adventurers League, where you might be higher level and you have no idea what they are, asking the other players what they can do, what their character's strong points are. Let them...
Yeah.
People like to talk about their character. They might like to do a little bit of bragging about what makes their character cool, especially if you ask them to. And so let them tell you what they think makes their character cool and what they like to do, because that will allow you to try to facilitate that thing that they wanted to do.
So, for example, if you know that your group has Leroy the Barbarian, and this might mean that if you're the spellcaster, maybe you don't choose the battlefield control spell that is uncontrollably over a massively large area. Maybe you choose one that can be brought into a smaller area, or you talk to the player of Leroy about maybe they're totally cool with getting caught in your thing, and they're like, haha, yeah, Leroy is just gonna charge right in, and that's cool if you catch me in whatever you're doing. Leroy's gonna get a backfire mantle for all the fireballs that he gets in because he charges straight into the front line. So, talking about, rather than just being like, ugh, like this is stuck because I want to do things the one way and you want to do things another way, figuring out like what is it that the person wants to play about the character, and then like talking to them about how you can, the battlefield control player and the charge right in character can both have a good time with that.
So if you are the battlefield control player or the charge right in character, it's much easier to figure out what you need to do to make sure that person is going to have a good time. It's possible that there's no solution if you are a third player, like you're the bard, and you talk to them and you find out that there's the battlefield control and the Leroy player, because the Leroy player might say that they're not willing to delay, they're not willing to do anything other than Leroy, and you might at least know where the tension point is going to be in advance so that you can try your best to do something that can help the other player. But I've definitely had that situation before. I mean, I was even playing a game the other day where one of the players even mentioned at the beginning, I have a fireball. I'm going to use that fireball. And we did 2 sessions. In the first, there were no combats. In the second, one of the combats had 10 opponents.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to stay out of the way so that the fireball could hit a lot of things. But other people did run in to attack a little bit. And fortunately, the fireball got to hit 3 of the 10 opponents, which is still pretty good. And I actually had an AoE that was an emanation but didn't hit my allies, and that was able to hit a lot too. And between me and the fireball, we did a good job of putting in some teamwork. So at least I could stay out of the way. If I had gotten into the way too, it might have gone down from 3 to only like 1 target that could be hit without hitting allies. I might have even just said, look, you can hit me. I'm feeling bad about the fact that you can't use your fireball here. So when we're...
but I think that it does help though, like that, you know, that person mentioned in advance that they wanted to use a fireball, so you were able to get out of the way. But I think that helps to show that, like, you know, not everyone is gonna go along with that, but having a conversation with them about, like, are you cool with being caught in the AoE?
That's right. So the next way that you can engage in teamwork is information warfare. Now, obviously, the GM actually knows a bunch of information about your characters, so the amount that you can perform information warfare to, like, hide your information from the enemy may depend on how good your GM is at not metagaming. However, information warfare on your side, on your team, gathering information about the enemies, either in advance by spying on them with magic or other things like that, or even in a combat by using something like recall knowledge to see if you know more about the monster, is an easy way to use teamwork to try to push things into your own advantage. This is especially true if you're able to figure out something like the enemy's weakest saving throw, and it wasn't obvious from looking at the enemy what that would be, because that can allow your allies to go after a number that's much easier, thus essentially turning into a stacking numerical advantage with all of the numerical teamwork we were talking about.
And that's an excellent use for, you know, you have 3 actions, using one of them to know things that are going to be useful. If you're the character who has more knowledges about a particular thing than thinking about, hey, you know, have we fought this kind of enemy before? Especially, you know, maybe you don't do it up front, but then you start to notice, hey, some of our attacks don't seem like they're very effective. Okay, let's go figure out what's going on. What is the resistance that we're running into here, and how might we get past it?
Exactly.
Because I find that people are more likely to recall knowledge when things seem to be going wrong than just preemptively. I did want to... So, I think we talked about this a bit. I'm not sure if the comment was just delayed, but as far as, like, damaging friendlies with AoEs, if it's going to hurt enemies a lot more, usually I just, like, ask the player, like, hey, are you cool with this? Or
I found that the majority of players do not want to take even a piddling amount of damage to do a massive amount of damage to their enemies. Like, I've even found that a decent percentage of players will be like, no, I won't take the 1 splash damage from this so that we can do, like, 25 damage to 3 enemies.
Yeah.
If it's more than 1, then it goes from a decent number to, like, a majority of players who won't go for it. But I'm pretty much... I'm often willing to be like, yeah, this hits either 2 enemies and not me, or like 7 enemies and me. Please hit me. I want you to hit 7 enemies.
So like in War for the Crown, my fighter was constantly getting hit by fireballs, and so like out of character, I was to the wizard players like, yeah, go for it. And then in character, my fighter would always grumble, at him. I was like, burning me again.
Table etiquette is not to hit your allies with friendly fire unless they approve it. But your table may have a different social contract than that. That's just kind of the standard one. So I would say basically figure out what other people are good for and play it that way. And yes, you might have Linda's character who just knew that she was going to get hit. In fact, when people made that like meme showing the face of the person who was smiling about getting a gift from their party spellcaster, and then their eyes became more and more dead when it was a backfire mantle.
It's a backfire mantle.
Yes. I sent that to our War for the Crown group because of Linda constantly getting fireballed by the party wizard. Everyone was like, yeah, that's the anti-Eustace item, because it was Eustace was the name of the wizard.
And she was annoyed because she was sick of getting burned, but she recognized that it was harming the enemies more, and so it meant less pain overall. But she still gave him crap for it.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a different kind of teamwork that can be very, very powerful, but it can be more difficult to pursue because of the fact that this is the kind of teamwork that often require your team to seriously work together and pre-plan out what they're going to do. And this is teamwork that will allow you to exploit advantages in action economy. Now, this teamwork is very important in, let's say, low-level Pathfinder 2 because of the fact that in lower-level Pathfinder 2, the enemies who have an action economy disadvantage, such as like solo bosses, tend to also be pretty strong. In high-level Pathfinder 2, their action economy disadvantage is enough that they're not going to be that dangerous, and in almost every other game, the same thing is true when the enemy has an action economy disadvantage. Pathfinder 2 manages to compensate for the action economy disadvantage, at least at low levels, on those enemies. So how can teamwork allow you to exploit it the most? Well, if you have 4 characters on your team, in Pathfinder 2, that's 12 actions, and to the enemy's 3 actions. That means that each of the actions you can tear away from that enemy is a major gain for your team. In fact, if 3 of the 4 characters can each remove 1 action from the enemy,
then the enemy can't do anything
every turn, then you automatically win.
Yes.
Obviously, that's an extreme example. It's difficult to remove multiple actions in that way, but there are ways to go about it that, and there are more of them than you might think. So here's an example. Suppose that one character tripped the opponent, which means they're going to have to stand up if they want to move. And one character slowed the opponent, perhaps with the fighter feat to spend 2 actions shooting an arrow, and then it slows the opponent if you hit by 1, making them lose 1 more action. That means that if they can't do anything from where they are, they will have only 2 actions, one of which needs to be standing up, and the other of which needs to be moving, and therefore they can't do anything.
So then what you did is, you tripped them, you slowed them, and then you had everyone back away.
Yes.
And then
that's why it requires a ton of teamwork.
So that maybe they still have a range attack, but their specialization, they're much better at their melee attack, and they're left with making a simple like backup attack.
Right.
Or maybe they're or maybe they're a spellcaster, and so they decide to stay on the ground, but then you guys are going to have an easier time hitting them because they're slowed, and then all they can do is cast their 2-action spell. Anything you can do to reduce the action economy of that enemy. And also, with your massive action economy advantage, the buffs and debuffs become all the more influential because the chance that your buff causes something to hit, or that the debuff causes something to hit that wouldn't have otherwise hit against that enemy in particular, are much higher.
Right. And so one of the key things to think about is that the more you can push onto enemies that involve the action economy when they are at an action disadvantage, the better. So let's take that example where you could trip them and potentially slow them with the arrow and have people move away. Now, if the arrow gets a critical hit with a critical specialization effect, then it pins the enemy to the ground, and they have to spend an action to remove that.
Yes.
So now they're at the case where they actually have 2 actions, and they need to spend 3 actions. One to stand up, one to remove the arrow, one to move, before they can actually do anything, right? And let's say you put the sickened condition on them, which stays until they spend an action to remove it.
Yeah.
More things that you stack onto the enemy that is going to compete for their actions, which includes movement, the better. This also means that Leroying in that situation is particularly terrible, because what you're doing there is you're giving the enemy free actions.
Yes.
If you rush into them.
Generally, you want to force the opponents to, if you have one opponent, you want to force them to approach you, on your terms. So, can you get them into a place where you can, force them to approach you, and also can you make it really inconvenient for them to engage the people you don't want them to engage? Can you make it so that, like, oh, if they want to attack this turn, they have to attack the champion because the archer and the wizard are both too far back for them to get to. So they're going to have to, it's going to be really inconvenient for them. Or, there's, there's difficult terrain in place that makes it really slow and annoying to get to those characters. So you encourage them to attack the one you want them to attack.
Absolutely. And as people pointed out in chat, removing the enemy's reactions can be key if they have a dangerous reaction, or one that punishes you for moving around if you want to use movement as a part of the way to exploit the enemy's action economy. And so all of these things are ways that you can work together to turn a fight that might have been just by the math, if you let the enemy wail at you with all of their best abilities, very, very dangerous, and having a decent chance at taking out some of the players, at least knocking them unconscious, or their characters at least. It could take it from that to a very easy fight.
Yeah, and as that points out, sometimes when you do this kind of action economy control and such, you can make it so some of their special abilities just don't work anymore.
If it requires 3 actions to use their ability, then even getting rid of one of their actions means that they can't use it.
Yeah.
For example. Or a 2-action melee ability, if nobody starts next to you and to the opponent, and they've lost an action for some reason, they just can't use it.
Yeah, it makes sense to, not only use the knowledge that you might start with or get from recall knowledge to adapt your tactic, but also is to observe the opponent as you're moving along and see what does it seem like they want to be doing, and how can you make them not be able to do that thing. So if it seems like they want to be doing like a big swing or whatever, or if it seems, or if an enemy has displayed, or that the enemy can do some kind of big AoE, then it makes sense to scatter your group so they can't hit a lot of you at the same time. Or, you might choose to say, let's say that you have one person that you really don't want them to hit with a particular thing. Then you might choose to be like, okay, let's cluster a few of us, so they have to choose between hitting the one person we really don't want them to hit and hitting a group of people to try to bait them into doing that.
Exactly. If you're trying to use positioning in order to mess with the enemy's action economy, you might also consider the idea of making it so that you don't have to spend as many actions to do that. So, for example, suppose you don't actually have a whole lot of people who are frontliners, and maybe you don't have reliable flanking in your group, and that's a disadvantage, but you could try to turn that into an advantage. And the way you can do that is consider a situation where you have 3 of your non-melee people that are all surrounding the boss in a triangle. They're far enough away that the enemy has to use multiple actions to get to them. And then you have your one melee character who does not Leroy charge into the enemy, but is still standing closer, or is on the path on the way to the ranged characters. Perhaps also if there's a choke point, all the ranged characters are on the same side, but they're past the choke point. And so then you have it so that the enemy has to move up to your melee character. Your melee character spends a turn doing their things, then moves away every turn.
Yeah.
And then your ranged characters only have to move away once they get into a position where they're actually in a threat.
Yeah.
And if they're in different directions, that means at most one melee character, one ranged character have to move, and the other two don't.
And then if the enemy ultimately decides to attack one of the ranged characters, then the ranged character could switch to doing something melee-based and then flank with the melee character.
Exactly.
While the other ranged characters can keep making their pot shots.
You can also use this same strategy, but combine it with minions in order to get an advantage. For example, summon spells are very powerful in most TTRPGs. In many of them, they're brokenly powerful. In Pathfinder 2, they aren't really, because of the fact that the things you summon are pretty weak compared to your actual character, but by virtue of putting something else on the map, it's going to be flanking. Its first attack is going to be okay, not great. And more importantly, especially at higher levels, they have a bunch of hit points. And the boss is probably going to crit them.
Yeah.
But at higher levels, that one crit won't quite take it out. So it's probably going to have to attack twice.
If that's the boss action subtraction from the boss.
Bingo. And if the boss is unlucky and the first 2 attacks are both not crits, it might even take 3. right? 2 regular hits, and then the third attack, which also probably hits, because let's be fair, the summoned creature has terrible AC.
So did the boss spend their entire? Did you train your turn of summoning the creature for the boss's entire turn when the boss is higher level than you? Then you've gained an advantage. Even if it didn't do anything else.
That was an example of making the boss lose all 3 of their actions.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it also costs a spell slot, but imagine if you had a spell that was just like 3 actions. And it was no save, and it was on your enemy's next turn. They roll attack rolls with the following results. If the attack is a critical success, then they add 2 points. If their attack is a success, then they add 1 point. And once they've reached 3 points, then they've surpassed your spell. Now, obviously, if that was like a sphere that blocked them in, that would be better than a summoned creature because there's nothing forcing them to attack the summoned creature.
And that points out anyone can flank. There's no save to the debuff for flanking. So sometimes putting yourself in a dangerous position can push your group's odds of success much higher, even if you wouldn't normally be that close. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Even if you're not gonna punch or attack them, just positioning yourself that way can definitely help.
And if you summon a healer, as someone mentioned in chat, then either they go after the healer, and then you sort of healed the group in a different way because the enemy spent turns attacking the healer, or the healer will live to heal. And even though it's lower level than you, if it just keeps healing every turn, it's going to heal a bunch of damage by the end of the fight. And so either way, you're going to get a pretty decent advantage out of it. That's another way to take the action economy into your hands.
Mm-hmm.
So when we moving back to battlefield control for a moment, we talked about the issues with battlefield control when the other players don't want to work with it, but I want to talk a little bit about the strength of it.
Yeah, it is really strong.
Yes.
So
using a debuff on the enemy in many games allows the enemy to resist it in some way. Not always. You might also have games where battlefield control and debuffs are equivalent. For instance, in Shadow Dark, the question is, did you cast the spell at all?
Mm-hmm.
Because you might not have done it. And if you don't, you can never cast the spell again for the rest of the day. But if you did, in Shadow Dark, cast the spell at all, then it worked. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, a debuff and battlefield control are kind of on the same footing. But in many games, enemies can resist your debuffs, but they can't resist the fact that you just put up like a wall or difficult terrain or something onto the back.
A lot of battlefield control is going to be about controlling movement and positioning. If you throw a wall in place, then you're going to have to move around the wall to get to you, or they're going to need to break down the wall. They might not be able to see you, so they might not be able to tell what you're doing on the other side of the wall. It can separate the battle into 2 smaller battles, giving you time to control pacing and tempo. If it's something that hampers movement, for example, and then it creates a lot of difficult terrain, it can slow them down so that they have to spend more actions to get to you in the first place.
That's right. So one of the keys...
Jeff was asking for a definition of some things.
The definition of battlefield control, which we then did define in chat, is a little bit behind us.
Oh, yeah, right.
So one of the keys to battlefield control and teamwork that you have to keep in mind is that there's a flip side to the whole, well, Leroy Jenkins ran in and messed up my chance to do battlefield control, which is that battlefield control spells legitimately, if used poorly, can screw up your team more than the enemy.
Yes.
And so you want to be sure that you're careful about how you're using battlefield control, because they can either be something that's kind of an equal proposition or worse in some situations. For example, I've had a situation in Pathfinder 1 where somebody made a pit and put the only enemies we were fighting into the pit. Mm-hmm. And then we couldn't fight them because they were in the pit. Yeah. And so they couldn't fight us because they were in the pit, but it just, it didn't actually help in that situation.
Whereas if they had put, some of the enemies into the pit, but not all of them, then people could have continued attacking those enemies, and then they get time without the...
Exactly. So... obviously, you could have a whole episode about where to place battlefield control, but here's the quick, easy way to use battlefield control well. When battlefield control is splitting up a battle with multiple enemies, and especially if you can split up the battle in such a way that you are splitting it close to half, assuming that the battle is like a fair battle. If the battle is really unfair on the side of the enemies being much stronger than you, you might want to split it so that the majority of the fight is cut off from where you are and you're fighting only a smaller portion. But in general, assuming that you're not fighting something super overwhelming, if you can split it close to half, such that half is you can engage with one half while the other half is now having a really rough time engaging with you, even if you have a rough time engaging with them, then that will allow you to face a lot less threat while that other half is doing whatever they need to do, whether that's moving through difficult terrain, like Linda said, bashing down a wall that you placed to cut the enemy group into half. It's always better to put a wall that allows some of the enemies to be on your side rather than be like, oh, wow, there's a lot of giants. I'll put a wall separating my whole team from all of the giants. Or worst, I'll put this wall behind the fighter so that all the giants and the fighter are on one side and the rest of us are on the other side. That's an example of harming your own team because you did to your team what you should have been doing to their team.
Because how much is the battlefield control interfering with your opponents versus how much it's interfering with your allies? And, you know, there's a comment in chat about, you know, some folks talking about tactics is metagaming. I think it's more likely to be seen as metagaming if it's sort of a conversation that happens during the battle about like exactly what's going on and like let's position things out. If for groups that see it as metagaming versus if you talk about it in advance and are sort of like, hey, you know, I have this spell that creates vines and things like that, and then someone's like, yeah, you know, that's actually kind of a pain for me when you put it in the center of everything and I'm trying to move in. Could you try putting it in the back next time or whatever?
Exactly. I think it's not metagaming even if you have the conversation during the fight, mainly because of the fact that I feel that these characters who have ventured with each other often for months, they've had all sorts of conversations that did not appear at the tabletop RPG table because we did not spend months of time with all of the side conversations they had talking about things. I think that it's anti-metagaming, sort of, well, there's no such thing as anti-metagaming, right? It's metagaming against yourself to assume that these characters who are professional adventurers that they've done for months, maybe years, have never discussed the idea after maybe if it's a spell that nobody knew, that even the sorcerer was like, whoa, my bloodline gave me this spell. This is the first time I've ever seen this spell. That's a different story. But if it's the spell that the sorcerer uses every time,
then they probably talked about it after.
There's no way that this particular situation is a little bit different than anyone that we've seen before, but there's no way that the party hasn't talked somewhat about like, oh yeah, you constantly are making all these walls. Here's how that would work with me. Like, so I think it's metagaming against you if you're just assuming, no, the only time we ever talked to each other was when it was said in character, these brief conversations that we're having there.
Yeah, folks were talking about, you know, real people consider terrain. And Broad mentioned that also that it sometimes is a good idea to pick the only enemy if you have something good that you can do at that time. Like, let's say that you need time to heal or buff or reposition your team. Absolutely.
It was in the situation where it was bad for us, it was the starting move. So we didn't really need time for anything. A lot of people were melee characters. The archers did not have flying, and this was one of those pits that if you're at the edge, you only see them if you're on the edge, and if you're on the edge, you might fall into the pit with the monster. And so it was just not a great situation, and we started figuring out, can you dismiss this pit? And he's like, I can't dismiss this pit. And
because we ran out of things to do. We were just like, okay.
It was a situation. It can happen. Though. It was funny. It was just a great example and something we could talk about here in this episode about teamwork. So, as you can see from the examples Linda and I have given you so far, while teamwork is something that can go all the way into your character build to try to build something that's better for teamwork. Yeah, for example,
like, you know, if you have how you build, you know, what do you choose to make sure that things synergize together? And also, you know, how can you, if you know someone has an ability like, oh, I have sneak attack, I really want enemies to be off guard, you know, having ways you can easily set up things like flanks or other ways to make the enemies off guard. If someone's like, oh, I have an ability that lets me make I have an ability that makes me really good at fainting, so I'm good at making them off guard, and then you can use that.
Or I have sneak attacks and I have Dread Striker, so anything that's frightened is off guard. And the Bard is like, okay, I'll use Dirge of Doom. Now everything is frightened. And the Rogue is like, well, now everything is off guard.
Yes, exactly. When you have a character that has an ability that's like, I do more stuff better if conditioned, and you're like, well, I can help cause condition to happen.
But make sure not to put all your eggs in one basket, like Linda said earlier, because enemies that are mindless might be immune, or immune to fear, might be immune to
So you wouldn't want to have like
song.
5 party members all be like, I'm going to take things about making people frightened. And the Bard would then always get there. It's like, well, no, because...
Well, there's already the fact that the Bard wouldn't overlap with those other characters. But the main thing is then the Rogue should think about what they're going to do if they can't get Dread Striker, even though the Bard normally gives it to them constantly.
Yeah.
Because what if the enemy is immune to fear or mindless?
Or
they should have a second technique.
Also, that like, what if if you're really reliant on something... If your group's really reliant on something, it can be useful to have a second person who can bring that to bear, because then it's like, oh, well, if that one character goes down, you can't necessarily benefit from it, especially if it's something that you can benefit from having multiple people do it. Like, it's not necessarily as beneficial to be like, there's multiple people who can all cause a +1 status bonus to attack rolls to the entire party. But if it's like, there's multiple people who are good at causing fear, well, multiple enemies can be demoralized at the same time or what have you.
Exactly. So you want to figure out what's going to go on and how you can have fun synergies without getting over-reliant on them.
What if the Bard goes down? Yeah, so you might still want someone else who has it, but maybe you don't pick that as their first thing. So, like, maybe you don't take Bless as, like, one of the only spells that the Cleric prepares as their first rank spells, but then... by the time that the Cleric has 3rd rank spells, it's worth putting Bless in there as a backup in case the Bard goes down or what have you. It's more a matter of like how valuable is it if someone else already has that ability. It's not to say you can never have backup.
So teamwork is not only used in tactical battles. Tactical battles are one of the main ways that they could be, but another way to build towards teamwork is to try to make sure you have coverage in a wide variety of skills. Rather than everybody in the entire party all picking up one obscure skill. If you're on the fence between occultism and arcana, and 3 of the other people in your party have arcana and nobody has occultism, maybe you can take occultism so that you have more coverage. Similarly, as Rohit mentioned in chat, if everybody in your group picks up an obscure language, you can have sort of a secret party language that only your party members and things with like true speech can actually learn.
And Stat points out too that like telepathy can also serve that role. If people, then if you have a situation where it's like, okay, yeah, you all can communicate, but your opponents can't hear what you're saying. Then when you're having that in-battle conversation about like, hey, go over there because I'm about to do a fireball. The opponents aren't like, oh, crud, they're about to do a fireball, let's scatter.
Absolutely. That can work both in or out of combat. Another way to use teamwork when you're in an out-of-combat situation also depends on the way that the game handles out-of-combat situations. So if you have situations where you're doing a victory point subsystem and you have to work together in order to, say, influence someone or escape from a chase or do something like that, one way to use teamwork is to not only look at what you are good at, but look at what other people are good at. And I'll give you an example of this. There was a fairly complex teamwork challenge that we were doing in one of our campaigns where we needed to build defenses against an enemy army by like training people up and making traps. And there were like 10 things we needed to do. And so my character and I, out of character, took the time to figure out all the tasks, all the skills for those tasks. And then we wanted to look not at, like, which one was, like, say, I the best at. Because my character was, like, a knowledge monkey and was probably the best at
several of them.
At, like, more than half of them.
Yeah.
But instead, I wanted to look at this character who's not good at many of them, which one is that person's best? Because they would all get a certain number of chances to build up the defenses. So we were like, okay, so this person is actually mostly only good at building the traps. They're not actually very good at any of the other ones. And we only need a certain amount of traps being built. So even though 2 other characters are also very good at building the traps, let's leave all the traps to this person unless we get towards the end and they're not all built.
Yeah, because otherwise that character's like, well, I'm just bad at whatever I'm doing.
Then it's called a comparative advantage. So exactly, they would have been left doing either nothing or being pretty unhelpful for the rest of the time if everyone was like, oh, traps are also my best thing. Let's all help each other on traps.
So another one to look at is like, is there only one thing that this character can do, or is there a thing that only this one character can do?
Bingo. That was what I was going to get to next as well. There turned out to be there were 10 tasks, and 7 of them my character was extremely good at, but one of them only my character was good at. So I started on the one that only my character was good at, and we put the person who was only good at traps on traps, and then the others were pretty flexible, so we just we let people look at which ones they were good at that were relatively rare, and people just picked the ones they thought would be a good fit. And so then I made a little schedule. I showed it to everyone, and I said in character, do you guys like this? Does somebody want to do something else that just interests you to roleplay doing it, even though we think this assignment will be most likely to achieve things? And then people all said, oh no, I like this. I'll do that. Or they said, I'd rather give a speech to the to the recruits to raise their morale. Okay, we'll rearrange it for that. So that's an example of using teamwork. When you're using teamwork out of character, and Linda put it in a good way, you're looking for constraint. Yeah. You're propagating the constraints of the character who is constrained to not do very many things, or the options that are constrained to only be met by certain characters. Now, if there's too much to do, and it's impossible to achieve all of the goals, and each goal gives a different benefit,
then it makes sense to talk about as a group which goals are you going to prioritize.
You can give up on certain goals. You can say, okay, this is the goal that only Vi could do, but also we don't really care about it that much, so maybe we just won't do it, and we'll send Vi to this other thing.
Because otherwise you might be like, well, we then fail to meet multiple goals because we're trying to invest in multiple things, and we were spreading our resources out too thin, and now we just fail at a lot of things.
We tried to do all 10 and only succeed at 4, whereas maybe if we tried to do only 8, we would succeed at all 8.
And that doubles our success,
Exactly. So these are the kind of ways to do that as a team. If everyone was just kind of individually moving back and forth to ones that hit their whims, or even were just the one that they were best at first, you could wind up with a lot of wasted labor where certain characters are no longer useful for any of the options after a certain point, or situations where nobody goes to a crucial task for too long and then it becomes impossible to achieve.
So having that conversation and figuring out what's your plan for approaching the skill challenge. And that way, if every character has something that they can be good at that they're working on, then everyone can feel good and like they're contributing.
So there's a question from chat that says, if you're the last person to make your character in the group, how do you avoid making the fill-in character where you take things because you know that the group is missing them? So, my answer to this question is that it's good to have someone in your group who is like me, who will intentionally wait until that busy person who does not want to make the character that fills in, makes their character, and then build last on purpose to make a fill-in character.
But I'm assuming based on that question that you don't...
Let's assume you don't have that.
You're like, I don't just want to have everything I do decided based on what the group doesn't have.
So you didn't have someone who would fill in, and you are the last person, and you don't want to fill in.
Yeah. So I guess the idea is, does it feel like a fill-in character to you if you... maybe you're like, well, I don't want to play a character that, has thievery and also divine magic and also this thing, and I feel like everything has all been decided by this. Maybe you look at it and you're like, okay, there's one thing that they're missing that I can fill in, and the rest we can figure out as a group that we're gonna do. Or we can have a conversation about, hey, I've noticed that our group seems to be missing the things 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'd be cool with picking up my character doing thing 4, but would anyone else be fun? But like, can someone else train in? I'd be cool with being like a thievery character, but can someone else train in medicine and figure that out? Like,
so Linda is assuming a pretty extreme example of that they're missing tons of stuff. I want to narrow down on something slightly different, and I don't know which of these was being asked in chat, but it's useful anyway. Perhaps they aren't like crucially missing massive amounts of things that you think they're going to need. Perhaps they're missing only one thing, but that they are very clearly missing it. So let's say you come in, you're like, all right, the other 5 have all built their characters. Let me see what they've got. Oh my gosh, literally no one has any healing. And so if I was that person, I would say I definitely have to play a healer. But suppose you're also like, I hate healing. I will never play a healer. I'd rather walk. What do you do to avoid that? You're just, I don't want to be the villain. I do not want to have healing. Having healing makes me feel bad. I want to go boom. So in that case, and obviously it would be easy to say, maybe it would have been good to not be the last person if you have such strong feelings about a certain aspect of playing, because there was a chance you were going to need to fill it in. But I would say, it looks like the person in chat is asking was thinking of that kind of situation where it's not that they're missing a ton of things and you have to make a character that's juggling 10 plates, but it's more that there's one thing they're missing and you do not want to give it.
That yet.
So I would say, even if I was willing to make a healer, I would still go to the other 5 players and beg one of them to change their character to have some healing, because I'd be like, look, I just made Healy McHealpants, who has the most healing possible, but when I'm down, who's going to heal me?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a little bit more challenging if you don't show that you're willing to do healing.
Yeah.
So,
maybe
to go back and get them to be like, I want one of you to completely revamp your character as a major healer.
Maybe you're like, all right, guys, I'll take medicine so I can do some I'll take medicine so I can do like some out of combat treat wounds, but I don't want to. But I want to be like fighting during the fight. I don't want to be like spending a lot of actions on battle medicine. Can you get several people to all agree to take battle medicine so that they share the burden, for example?
That would certainly be nice. If you're feeling like the group is also, they didn't have a mitigator either on damage, it was from our video, if you watch on the channel, the one with the picture of the fighter and the champion, and how the champion can actually increase your damage by mitigating your allies going down. Suppose it was just all aggro, pure damage, and it was very clear that just having battle medicine on a few characters was not going to be enough to do any mitigation. In that case, try to convince someone. Be like, could you change to a champion? Maybe, like, it's still a fighting character, and they might be like, well, why won't you build a champion? And then you like give the golem hiss. We hates it.
Or you're like, yeah, but I played a champion in the last 2. The last 2 games I played a healer and a champion.
But let's say you didn't, because that is a supposition that gives you a good edge in this discussion. Let's say you don't have that edge because you are allergic to healing and mitigation as well.
You're like, I just don't enjoy playing.
You're just like, I just don't like it. It makes me feel bad. It feels cheesy to me to be able to just erase the damage the enemies are doing. I just want to do damage, or whatever reason it is. You obviously are being selfish here if you're not willing to do any of that work, and you've never done it in the past. But maybe the rest of the group is going to be okay with that, because in a way we're playing a fantasy game as an escape to have fun and to de-stress. So it can be okay to be selfish sometimes if there's someone else who didn't really actually care. They were just like, oh yeah, I didn't realize you felt so strongly about this. I do really, really, really want to play a fighter, but I also had a cool idea for a war priest, so I'll give that a shot. That's fine. Like, if everybody is also equally vociferous, and then all of you are like vampires in the sunlight for healing, then maybe you try it without a healer and everybody dies, and then you see what happens after that. Or maybe everybody doesn't die. Maybe
you talk to the GM and you're like, hey, we've determined that everyone in this entire group hates playing healers, and
damage mitigation.
And then the GM is like, all right, There's 4 of you. How would you feel about having a 5-person group where I put in a GMPC heal bot who will who's gonna heal people?
And then the group says we hate GMPCs because GMs always use them to overshadow the players or to bludgeon us and tell us we should be doing something different by showing how effective their GMPC is with their healing and their mitigation. And make us feel bad about not doing it ourselves.
It's like they're like, we don't like playing bards, we don't like playing whatever. It's like, okay, I'll make a bard who is going to inspire people and heal, and they're not going to really be doing very much damage. They'll just do the things that you guys don't really enjoy doing.
And let's suppose that they don't want a GMPC because they've been burned by GMs in the past who legitimately made a GMPC.
Then in that case, you drop more healing items.
So you could do that. You could put in a lot of healing items. Now, the problem is that I suspect that if you drop a lot of healing items in a group like this, they're not going to use them very efficiently. Mm-hmm. Not only that, but healing items often require you to draw them or have them in hand. And
at least to let them recover when they get beaten to a pulp in between encounters.
Oh, I'm assuming they're going to lose some encounter eventually at some point.
Because they refuse to use the healing items.
One thing the GM could do is just say, look, it sounds like you guys just want to do damage and you don't necessarily want to use mitigation or healing or other things like that. So I'm just going to lower the difficulty of all the encounters by 1 level to make up for the fact that there's not really a lot of diversity in what you're all doing.
Yeah.
And we'll just go from there.
That was a good summary there. The best wisdom is, number 1, communicate with the group. 2, split up the responsibility of the unwanted role as much as possible. That's a really good way to put what I was getting at. Is if people are like, I don't want this to be my whole thing, figure out ways that multiple people can do it a little bit. And 3, ask to alter the situation, add a player, a DMPC, etc.
Bingo.
That's a really good summary.
And one of the other ways to alter the situation is the GM just makes the fights easier, and then you just don't have it because maybe people didn't like it to that degree. And so there's always a way out of it because people in chat were like, it sounds like we've learned that the true difficulty in TTRPGs is people.
Yeah.
The problem can be people, but the solution is also people. Because if you work together with your group, including the GM, you can find a solution to just about any problem.
And I do think that what David's saying there too. I do wonder how common that specific issue is. How common is it that a group is not a single one of us will play a healer, and also we're not on board with you throwing in a basic healer, DMPC, or other means of healing.
Mm-hmm. And Rohit points out that in 5e, you could just have a group of 4 archers that just win any published encounter. Look, in Pathfinder 1, you don't need a healer. Basically, in any game where you can go so aggro and be so overpowered that the fights are easy enough to win, you don't. And that's actually why I suggested in Pathfinder 2 that if you lower the levels by 1 of everything, you might not need the healer, because basically the idea is to get yourself in a situation closer to other RPGs where it's just so easy to win if you're optimized enough that healing is actually even an unoptimal thing to include, or mitigation, because you just don't need it. You could just win with pure aggro.
I'm also seeing some chat about the role for combat mimic boxes. Should I go get my mimic?
Yeah, go get your mimic. Alright, Linda's gonna go get her mimic, which I didn't even know it was her mimic until she said that, but I'm not gonna try to take that from her. Because she really, really likes the mimic box, and we actually got it before Steven for the first time ever. Usually he gets stuff months before Linda and I get it, but ours came in and Steven's like, what? You got yours first? So she's gonna go and get it now too. But it's absolutely true that a pure aggro strategy can work in the RPG if it's easy enough to win that you don't need teamwork. That's also why I was suggesting if your group doesn't have teamwork, that the GM could also, just for a tactical way, make the fights easier. Can you hear that satisfying clomping sound?
Let's see.
Yeah, I think
it has magnets, so it kind of... How do we get the magnets to...
Wait, no, the magnets will allow it to stay open.
Yeah, partially open.
Partially open like that.
Let's see, I didn't quite do it right this time,
I think, yeah. What's going on here? So the magnet's generally allowed to stay open, but I think it's the fact that it's swaying.
Oh, that I'm swaying it, yeah.
Yeah, when it's on the desk, it was able to stay open.
Here's Here's a Twix. Nah. I was storing some Halloween candy in it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that clicking sound in the teeth. Anyway, that's a mimic.
That is definitely a mimic. Yes, Mark T points out that in the same way that we said that other people are both the problem and the solution to all of life's problems, that Homer Simpson said alcohol is both the problem and solution
and Deb
to all
also
of the
pointed out
problems.
stamina variant rule, like so messing with like the death and dying is another way. So
Yes.
so you can work on some things in the GM side too.
Absolutely. So basically, you can alter the game to match what your group needs. You just need a little bit of flexibility, and you need to talk to each other. Like we said since the beginning, talk to the rest of your group, and you'll be able to improve your teamwork, or find out that your group hates teamwork and that you're just not going to use it, and that your GM can adjust the encounters for you from there. So that is the cheat code that your GM and the game designers do want you to know about, because teamwork makes things better for everyone, whereas just using some kind of way to make your character into a god that can win encounters on their own only makes it better for you.
Yeah, and it's more satisfying for everyone whenever you can have a success and you're all like, this is how we all work together, you know? And I think that part of teamwork too is acknowledging, cultivating teamwork is acknowledging the value of teamwork, you know? Thanking the bard whenever like you help make your attacks hit or other things like that. You can do that both as a GM and a player. Chat wants me to say teamwork makes the dream work.
Yes, it does.
I've now said it.
Absolutely. And it feels good for everyone, and it's more likely to have people come out with a satisfying session. Except maybe players who are just like so much of a main character syndrome that they're just like, I don't like that it felt like we were all working together there. I wanted to do it myself. But there's no way to satisfy a player who has that feeling as well as the rest of the people at the same table unless the other people want to be sidekicks.
Yeah.
And so essentially, it's a good way to play both for vibes and for success, and for like success in multiple ways. Not just winning fights, but truly experiencing the fun of tabletop RPGs. All right, so I think we've covered everything about the main topic. Let's vote for our next exciting episode of Arcade Market. By next, we mean on Saturday. So I saw a vote for 5 that said using Battlefield Control.
Battlefield Control, yes.
So I will add...
So I saw a vote for 3 and a vote for 5. So David was the one who voted for 3. Who
Rico
voted for 5?
Rico voted
for 5. Okay, so we have 1 vote from David for 3, 1 vote for Rico for 5, and everyone else can vote. Yes.
We're going to do planes and planar travel on Tuesday. So next Saturday will be whatever episode wins this vote.
Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up. And if you would like, you can also subscribe for more of our content.
Or hit the bell to be alerted about it. Or even join us and become a leaf lushy if you'd like to support us. So, any or all of those things would help support Arcade Mark. David is changing to 5. Okay.
So now we have 4 5s and 2
3s. 2 3s.
Indeed.
Okay. 5 5s.
5 5s and 2 3s.
Okay. So it seems like, maybe unsurprisingly, the follow-up that talks about something that's similar to this episode that people wanted to...
Like that smash button.
Yes, they can like the smash button. If this was Steven, he would be like... If we get 100 people to like this while we're live,
then
which
we'll
we won't because 20
people
people are watching it, then we'll make Linda sing a song. All right. So it looks like both 3 and 5 were pretty popular, but 5 has it. So
we will leave 3 on the poll for the future.
And we'll move to Battlefield Control. So we're doing planes and planar travel on Tuesday, and Battlefield Control is going to be next Saturday. And
if you're
actually, wait, yes, I think the Saturday after that we don't have an episode,
That's
I believe.
Correct.
So, what were you saying, Linda?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you all for joining us. If it is a weekend where you are, have a great weekend. Otherwise, have a great day. And we hope to see you back again soon.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.